Welcome back. All right, so Montreal Canadiens. I want to talk about the Montreal Canadiens because they are exceeding expectations right now, even though they're outside the playoffs. And this is what makes them even more interesting to look at, right? So if you're the general manager right now, are you making moves to try to keep them in the hunt? Are you looking at keeping players around? This is a question that is worth taking a look at. The other question is, so let's just say they're overachieving to this point. How long can they stay in the hunt? The win last night against Calgary shows that they're still capable of getting wins. Sometimes it's because their goalies steal it. Sometimes they're just getting those key goals from their young forwards. And it is worthy of discussion how a lot of their young players are already in place. So I don't think there's a panic if they don't end up drafting Bedard or Fantilli or Michkov or one of the bigger names in this year's draft, right? So regardless of where they end up finishing outside of the playoffs, should that happen, I don't think there's any concern in Montreal about whether or not they're tanking well enough. And they could fall off, right? You look at the goals for and goals against. They're currently scoring 2.78 goals per game. They're allowing 3.39 goals per game. So that tells you that when they lose, they're usually losing bigger than they're winning by, right? So they'll win 1-goal games, but they'll lose a game by 3, maybe 4, that kind of thing. And it does get skewed by blowouts, but in the end, usually the team that scored more goals than they've allowed ends up making the playoffs. Their power play, 15.7%. That's not good enough, but their penalty kill's been solid, 82.3%. So if their power play got a little better, and if they evened up their goal differential a little bit, they'd be more in the discussion, wouldn't they? Their shots per game, they're getting 29.8 shots per game. They're allowing 33.4 shots per game. So that's something as well they could tidy up. But when we look at their upcoming schedule, they could stay in the hunt for a while. Tomorrow, on the 3rd of December, they're in against Edmonton. Then on Monday, they're in against Vancouver. Now, of the two teams, they have a pretty good history against Vancouver. I'm understating it there. And they could win at Vancouver. Vancouver has looked very not Vancouver-like the last couple of games. They're just there's no way to describe those losses against Florida and Washington other than it was miserable from top to bottom. So Montreal can take advantage of that. The next night they go to Seattle and then they go back home for 2. First against LA and then against Calgary. So if you look at those next 5 games, Edmonton, is that a winnable game? It can be, yes. It's on a Saturday night. I could see Montreal going in and upsetting the Oilers. The Oilers have been very up and down this year. I've mentioned Vancouver, Seattle. Seattle's on a 7-game winning streak, but Montreal's the kind of team that could give them trouble, absolutely. If their goaltending is fantastic, if Allen has that kind of game or Montembeault has that kind of game like they had last night with Allen in Calgary, they could win a game there. And then again, when they come home and they're playing against LA and Calgary, LA has been up and down. Their goaltending's had issues. And for Calgary, well, they just beat Calgary. So they just have to figure out what they did there, do it again. There you go. So the next 5 should not take them out of the hunt. Then they go to Ottawa. Well, that's a winnable game as well, right? Then they go home to play against Anaheim. Well, Anaheim's 32nd in the league in the standings. And then things get a little tougher. At home against Tampa. So Tampa's not going to be easy on the 17th. Then they go to Arizona on the 19th because Arizona can't play on the road forever. Eventually they have to go home. And then it gets really tough. On the 21st, they're in Denver to play Colorado. 23rd, they're at Dallas. After the Christmas break, they're at Tampa Bay. Then they're at Florida. Those are back-to-back. And then on the 31st, for the 3rd game in 4 nights, they're at the Washington Capitals. So things get difficult at the end of the month. And I do think that Colorado, Dallas, Tampa, Florida, those 4 are all back-to-back like that. That could give us a good idea. If they lose all 4 of those games, it'll probably drag them out of the race. Because, again, by the end of December, we have a good idea of who is or who isn't in. There are some exceptions, but generally we'll have a good idea. So if Montreal can build up a bit of a cushion with some wins at this part of the schedule, if they struggle in this part, they should still be okay. But there's a possibility they end up above the playoff line at points during December. So the overall numbers I've looked at, but the big picture is still out there too. So you've got the fact that they have the 2023 first-round pick of the Florida Panthers. It's not protected. So unlike every other first-round draft pick that gets traded at this time in NHL's history, this one's not protected outside the top 10. So if it's a top 10 pick, it's a top 10 pick. Not much they can do about it. And so for Montreal, they have 2 potentially outside the playoffs draft picks in what's considered a very solid draft. And I say that because, yeah, Florida is skirting that line. They could miss the playoffs. Not saying they will. That's a totally different thing, but they could miss the playoffs. They also have Calgary's 2025 first-round pick. That's conditional. There's various conditions on that. But in the end, they will get an extra first-round draft pick in 2025. It may be Calgary's, it may not be. But at either rate, that's the draft pick they got for taking Monahan, right? Monahan, there was discussions about whether or not he'd play again not too long ago, about whether he'd be any good, but whether he's all washed up. And so Montreal has won that trade going away. Montreal, absolutely, they've won that trade going away. They have Monahan, who's played every game and he's played well, and they get a first-round draft pick. It's fantastic having cap space. They also have 3 fourth-round picks in next year's draft. So they're in pretty good shape already. And I say this because there is the potential that this team stays in the hunt, and maybe they don't add draft picks at the deadline. They don't have any extra picks in 2024 yet, though. So will they have a few extra for 2023? There's nothing extra for 2024, but they also have some pretty good prospects coming up. So you've got Philip Massar, right? He is a forward. Emil Heineman, who got hurt, I believe, during the preseason there. But Heineman is considered to have a pretty good upside. And Jan Mysak, who is considered to have a high upside as well. So those are 3 forwards right there who could be jumping into this lineup as soon as next year, maybe the year after. On the blue line, you've got Justin Barron, who they picked up from Colorado. And I think they have high hopes for him. He's in the minors, plying his trade at this point. And then in net, for a prospect, you have Caden Primo. Caden Primo, there are some who, believe he could be the backup next year. That is quite possible, because either Allen or Montembeault could end up getting traded if they feel like Primo is ready. But goaltending hasn't been a problem this year, not along the level that I think we might have expected when Carey Price basically was revealed was highly unlikely to play this year. And I do think Carey Price's career is probably done. That $10.5 million would stay on LTIR until 2026 if that were the case. But when we look at their scoring, it's a pretty good story right now if you're a Montreal fan. Suzuki, 23 years of age, really coming into his own. 23 games, 12 goals, 13 assists, 25 points. And his two-way play is getting a lot of attention. There's a lot of discussion about Suzuki and how well he's playing, and in part because he fits so well with Cole Caulfield. 21 years of age, 23 games, 13 goals, 9 assists, 22 points. And Caulfield has been fantastic. Now, Caulfield is an RFA next summer. He is going to get paid. He's going to get paid a lot. Now, he may end up getting the exact same cap hit as Suzuki. I wouldn't be surprised if Montreal tries to sell him on the idea of, okay, we'll give you the same cap hit in term we gave Suzuki, and then maybe Caulfield accepts that, right? Kirby Dach, 23 games, 4 goals, 13 assists, 17 points. I remember when Dach signed his extension with Montreal, there was some debate about whether or not he was good enough for that. I've seen plenty of people calling him a bust. Dach is 21. So Dach's 21, Caulfield's 21, Suzuki's 23. They're all basically kids, and Dach has had a huge bounce back. So I'm still bewildered by what Chicago was thinking trading Dach, because he's a center, he can play the wing as well, but he's a very good young forward, and I think you need those during a rebuild. But anyways, Montreal was happy to take him off Chicago's hands. Monahan in 23 games, 5 goals, 11 assists, 16 points. Monahan, I think, is playing the best hockey he has in at least a couple of years. It does seem like the injuries, either he's learned to play through it, or he's feeling better, one or the others. Probably a little bit of a mix of both, right? So Monahan may stick around. He's on an expiring contract. He's a UFA, right? Then you got Dvorak, 23 games, 4 goals, 5 assists, 9 points. To me, that shows how there's a drop-off in terms of that scoring, right? So they've got 2.78 goals scored per game. That's one of the lower marks in the league. Even though that top line has been fantastic, but the depth scoring has not been what you need it to be if your team's really and truly going to make the playoffs. So this is something that they're going to need to pick up, right? So Dvorak with 9 points. Then you got Gouli, 20 years of age, 23 games, a goal, 8 assists, 9 points. Gouli is an example of a player that I would say, no, he's probably not in the Calder hunt. I don't think he's going to get a lot of Calder votes. But long term, we're going to look back and say Gouli was a gem right out of the gate. Excellent defensive defenseman. Got a little bit of offense in there as well. I do wonder about offense from the blue line with Montreal in general, but Gouli's pretty good. And then you got Hoffman, 16 games, 5 goals, 3 assists, 8 points for Hoffman. Of course, right now he's injured, but Hoffman, I think, probably ends up being moved at some point by Montreal. Gallagher may very well end up being moved as well. Neither Hoffman or Gallagher are on expiring contracts, though. So 22 games for Gallagher, 3 goals, 5 assists, 8 points. And one of those contracts that, might be a bit problematic to trade, but any contract can get traded if you get creative enough about it. Savard, 23 games, a goal and 7 assists for him. Savard blocking a lot of shots last night for the Montreal Canadiens against Calgary. Josh Anderson, 21 games, 5 goals, 2 assists, 7 points. His contract's not expiring either. Does he get moved? Do they look for draft picks for him? His name's been mentioned in rumors here and there. We'll see, right? And Slafkovsky, 18 years of age. There was a lot of discussion about him being a bust when he was drafted. And then, the guy's going to be a bust during the summer and during training camp. And, he's not good enough. And he's played 18 games. He has 4 goals, 2 assists, 6 points. I think he's going to be just fine. Slafkovsky's been good. Sure, there's been an adjustment, but how many players actually don't need an adjustment period to the National Hockey League? It's rare. Jack 21 years of age, has been a revelation on the blue line. 21 games, 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 points. And also a young defenseman in Jordan Harris, at 22 years of age, has played 20 games, has a goal and 4 assists, 5 points. So you have 6 defensemen you're playing regularly, and 3 of them are 22 years of age or younger, with Gooley, Jack and Harris. And you've still got Barron and others who could come up and play who are young defensemen. So this is a team that, to me, already has a lot of good young players, and there's a lot of potential. And that's not even taking into account a veteran like Matheson, who's there too, right? Then you've got Drouin, who's been out. 12 games, 4 assists for him. Weidman, 13 games, 4 assists for him. Weidman, of course, part of that blue line. So the overall depth in Montreal's not bad. A lot of good young players here. One that kind of stands out is Dodonov. So Dodonov was picked up from the Vegas Golden Knights. 19 games, just the 1 goal, 1 assist for Dodonov. So either Vegas knew that the goals he was getting in Vegas were more of a product of where he was than who he was. And what I mean by that is that there's players who put up good point totals and goal totals, but it may be more reflective of their line mates, maybe more reflective of just certain things in the game, more than them generating the goals, right? Sort of like, I guess, Anaheim figured that with Sonny Milano, and other teams must have thought that too, because it took a while for Milano to get back into the NHL. Wasn't back in the NHL right to start this season. So Dodonov could be moved at the deadline. He's on an expiring contract. We'll see. Drouin's contract's expiring as well. There's some money coming off the books for Montreal. And then in net, you've got Jake Allen, 32 years of age. 7-8 is his record, an .898 save percentage. He was very good last night. He's been inconsistent, but he was very good last night. Montembeault, 26 years of age. 5-2-1 record, .924 save percentage. And Montembeault's an interesting one because, I was a big fan of his in Florida at one point and kind of fell off and had his problems last year in Montreal as well. But things have turned around pretty well for him. Montembeault looks like the real deal for the Montreal Canadiens right now. And so I do think that their goaltending is good enough. They could keep this in place. They could trade one or the other and bring up Primo later on if they deem that Caden Primo is ready for more action in the NHL. And they could add 2024 picks, right? They could add another 2023 pick. They could add more 2024 picks. So other expiring contracts too. Byron's on an expiring contract. He's on LTIR. He's had problems with staying healthy. Restricted free agents as well. Harris is a restricted free agent. I mentioned Caulfield. And Pizzetta. Pizzetta, a younger forward. I think he's 23. Pizzetta not on the board here, obviously, but I think he's been a good bottom 6 forward. There isn't really, other than Caulfield, we're not looking at a situation where anybody's getting a massive raise. So, Montreal could get creative this summer. They could move money out, and they could bring in more players. Montreal could, if the team stays consistent, if this team ends up, say, 5-6 points out of the playoffs, if you're the general manager this summer, you could say, you know what? We're going to have some cap space. The cap's going up. We could go out and get somebody. We could pick up a prime defenseman. Just say like a really good defenseman, and all of a sudden you could have a team in Montreal that next year people are picking to make the playoffs yet again. So I do think that this is a team that's done this through hard work. I think they've done it through having some fun. That's why their goals against average ends up being a little bit higher, I think. They play a wide open style often, and I think that for Marty St. Louis, he wants to make sure that these guys develop as well as possible. He wants to give them the time, and he wants to let them make mistakes. and that's key as well. So I think Montreal's doing it right. I do. And I think they are a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of a rebuild. That's why I think this is going to be more of a retool than a rebuild. Because the players are forcing the issue. They're winning games they're not supposed to. They're staying in the hunt. But can they continue to do so? Does this schedule in December sink them, or does it give them an even better chance if they come out of, say, that road trip where they go through Colorado, Dallas, Tampa Bay, Florida, and then Washington, right? They come out, if they win 3 out of those 5, who knows? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video, and hey, so if they don't get Connor Bedard, you can be okay with that? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.